Welcome everyone to the Scrollers podcast. We're going live today. Here with my good friend Yondar. We're going to talk about modernism, all of its ailments, and maybe get into some topical concerns too. But we're going to have a fun evening, I imagine. Yondar, how are you doing tonight?
I'm great. I am great. Thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so... people confronting their problems or vacuous sound bites. Going with the latter. It's typically how we go, isn't it?
going with them.
Yeah. We've got some memes tonight. We got some topics. The RNC is going on. I think a lot of the world, it is what it is. Other countries watch our political. It seems like politics churns somewhat violently in America every 4 years, and the rest of the world watches anxiously to see what America is going to decide. For better or for worse. We're going through that right now. It's been really interesting. To be perfectly honest, I think most people in America, my sense has always been that most people don't tune into it, and if they do, they find it a noxious blend of like civic religion turned up to 11 on both sides. Just blatantly on both sides. And this year's been no
convention or the election.
Oh, the conventions themselves. I think the conventions are.
Okay.
Yeah, they're just. Yeah, and that's the point. There's something to be said for civic religion in some sense being healthy for any and every country, and but America does it in a particular way that's particularly strange and obnoxious, and the whole world has to watch it, unfortunately. Or even if they don't watch it, they're still affected by it. So, what are your thoughts?
For those of you just real quickly, for those of your audience who have not heard me or gone to my channel before, I am from Canada. So we do get the committees. I won't say they're streamed on television here because our state-funded media likes to maintain a tight control over how things are presented, but they're certainly covered because the entire Canadian government changes just massive amounts of how it plans to do things depending on where the election winds blow in the U.S. So, I think, actually, looking at some of the headlines they put out, I think a lot of Canadians heard about the shooting attempt on Trump before a lot of Americans did.
Oh gosh, really? Wow.
Well, when you saw those CNN, loud popping noises heard, Donald Trump walks off at rally, or Al Jazeera just put Donald Trump leaves stage. And then the Canadian news sites were like ex-president shot.
Oh, that's wild. Yeah. Your breaking sources for it said it was an assassination attempt. Yeah, it took I think an hour before the.
They said shooting. They didn't say assassination, but they did say shooting.
Yeah, we didn't say that. Trump fell. They ushered him off stage after loud popping noises. It's wild.
I love CNN even showing him with the blood everywhere.
It's like, oh my gosh. Yeah.
Beautiful. So yeah, we often get better coverage of America than Americans do.
Yeah. I think that's often if I can say it, it's often the Canadian role in a way to be close enough to understand us and far enough away to criticize us. It's why your best comedians do well here, I think, because of that, your ability to observe.
Yeah, well, I mean, beyond that, Canada is the testing ground for a lot of American policies. Most of our universities are staffed by American academics.
Really? Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of most Canadian academics actually work in America. Because you can't get a job here unless you have like 20 years experience. Almost all of my professors were American. A lot of our businesses owned by the states, and ever since JFK, even our politics have been largely influenced, if not determined, by America. And oftentimes, like, people in your country will want to float a policy, and they'll test it here first, through the webs of bureaucrats.
Yeah.
Not in a conspiratorial way, in a, like, let's all meet at a conference and discuss this way, and it's just easier to implement it here than it is to implement it in Alabama.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So thinking of how to transition to, where do you want to take this topic? We did want to talk about modernism. We did want to talk about contemporary cultural issues. We do have some things with the Republican National Convention that you wanted to touch on. Yeah. Should we address those first, or what do you think?
Yeah. So one of the more interesting things of the RNC. Well, I mean, there were a few interesting things to make it across the border, but one of the interesting things was the fact that you had a Sikh deliver the closing prayer in, I want to say Punjabi. I hope it was Punjabi. My apologies to any listening figures if it was not Punjabi. And I noticed it caused a real, fight.
Yeah, sure.
Howler monkey crap match between the ecumenical moderate wing of the right, represented, by Trump and I know it's weird to say Trump and the establishment given how Trump's positioned himself, but Trump and the establishment. And on the other hand, the groups like the Christian nationalist movement, or some of them were neo-pagan, like sides of the far right. And
between the conservatives and the right wing, in a way. To put too fine.
The dissident right, they like to call themselves. That's the emic term, with the term you endonym. And I guess one of the things it leads up to is the question of, how does religion, you talk about mentioned civic religion, how does religion function in the public sphere? Political, social, so on. And the major issue, I guess, that we wanted to talk about today is why secularism, defined here as the absence of religious values, just is impossible. Not doesn't work, not is a bad idea, not let's get rid of it for something better. It literally impossible in the sense that it is a conceptual non-existent that cannot possibly exist.
Oh, love that.
And wanted to, I guess, bring it up, not because either of us want to replace secularism with a stringent theocracy. Quite to the contrary, it's the reason we want to bring it up, and you can see this in the meme, is the total non-existence of secularism is a subject of immense concern. in terms of questions about human dignity and freedom of expression, and operations in the public sphere, whether you're for atheists, but also for religious people.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't answer this question, the best thing is we're permitting the continuation of a communal falsehood. But at worst, we're permitting genuinely theocratic and some vicious political philosophies to flourish unhindered by attacking these very arguments. And this potentially challenges the core reason we even installed quote-unquote secularism in the first place, which was freedom of religion and freedom from mandatory conversion or execution or forced church attendance.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you had anything you want to add on or can launch into it.
Yeah, so there probably is something. So I'm trying to navigate this, trying to understand the different arguments as they understand themselves. And there's something to be said, I think there's kind of two things going on in a way in America, and one is this this civic tension between what we do, and increasingly it's the tension between whether we talk about religion and how we can talk about it, and then there's also the there's the Christian nationalism on one side, and I guess like a secular conservatism on the other within the RNC, and frankly, the exact same thing is going on in the Democrat Party with how what religious standards are we platforming and which we aren't, and they're just absolutely wrapped by that. And the Israeli-Palestine war is just one. It's just the next step in a very long train of tensions that they have yet to resolve. But at the Republican National Convention, it's been interesting because the Republicans have basically taken over what was once a Democratic stronghold of a kind of ecumenical popularism, libertarian-leaning kind of thing. This is a big tent. It's everybody has a place here. It's this is for everybody who loves life and liberty. And I think they've been trying to reflect that in a particular way at the RNC. Trump famously was a lifelong Democrat. So until he decided to run Republican, because he had a sense that the parties were changing, and he got ahead of it successfully. So a lot of people have switched in a way, just like Trump himself switched parties, and so you get these interesting moments. I'll turn off the meme so we can see Harmeet Dillon, the attorney who gives the benediction at the close of night one. You get these interesting moments where the Republican Party doesn't look the same, and people don't have it figured out how to have that conversation, I guess. Or one half has. The folks that were recently Democrat and they switched to Republican, I think they still kind of retain that sense that we're proudly ecumenical. And then there's the other side of this ongoing political civil war that is saying, no, the Republican Party, we're not going to allow it to be a a refuge for people that were disenfranchised by the progressive blue church, cultural hegemony of the extreme elite and the dependent poor. We're going to do something. We're not just here to welcome in refugees from that. We're actually going to do something more stridently defined with a particular lean, I guess, towards I'd say understanding the nation on a particular level, I guess, that doesn't feel as ecumenical as the secular 20th century would have been comfortable with. Is that might be saying the same thing you said, but longer and less well. But
and then
that's my thoughts.
Canada has almost the exact opposite problem, where very progressive country, and it settled in the 70s and 80s with the first Trudeau on the very Protestant, very stereotypically like Western Anglo-Protestant. Your religion is a private matter. It's entirely a matter of the heart, and it has no social impact. And now millions of immigrants are coming over the border from religions and cultures that do not share those metaphysical presuppositions about what it means to have beliefs or be religious or believe in gods. And they're really they were all told that this was a multicultural country where they could do whatever they want. And then they get here and the progressives are like, and by multicultural we mean our ideology.
Sure.
They're not liking that. You can look at some you get really deep into Canadian news politics and you'll notice there are some absolutely wild religious disputes going on, not too far under the surface, but nobody in the media here really wants to talk about them because they don't have the hermeneutical lexicon, the inner understanding or the language required to intelligently discuss about these metaphysical views. And it's leading to, we're in the middle of an economic war, basically, with India right now, because nobody in our government or media knows how to talk about the religious problems in the Indian subcontinent. What they mean and how they're approached by Indians themselves.
That's fascinating.
Really, I guess that one of the first and biggest issues with sort of the absence of religious values is that definition was conceived with a very specific understanding of what it means as this sort of inner sphere distinct from outer spheres of putatively irreligious or secular things. And to be honest, there are no values. Some problem we're realizing now is there is no magic sphere of the religious, and there are no values that are, say, discreetly religious versus discreetly irreligious that we can separate in that nice, neat way.
That's interesting.
Whether we... health ethics are going to be the very obvious one. Issues of social organization, anyone who's studied Islam might know what I'm talking about. But even when you get to Confucianism, Falun Gong, Hinduism, but you also have if I said health is a matter of the utmost religious concern, right? That would generally not elicit much nodding in reply from Christians. the most I might get is, well, yeah, you should keep yourself healthy to do God's work. We would not consider engaging in very specific, like, exercise routines to be a religious act. Nor would we consider it our, like, obligation to resist foreign exercise routines because they're incompatible with, say, Christianity or Judaism or whatever. But some of the religions that have come into Canada do. And to be fair, like, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I'm such a fanatic loyalist to Western medicine that I can't see where they're coming from. Because there are scientific disputes at work here too.
Sure.
But at least part of these issues are religious, and they're very religious understandings of the body, of the relationship between the body and the soul. You have the resurgence in Canada of very traditional gender norms. You have... I'm trying to think of different areas, but there's just so many that my mind is, like, failing to conceptualize them.
Yeah.
Like, there are people, you know, like, because some religions even have economic traditions. They do not make a distinction between your religious life and how you acquire, handle, and use resources.
Yeah. So would you say? Okay, so in a way, I'm trying to think of how to tie this in. Tell me if I'm doing a bad job of it. But these religions coming in from like South and Central Asia, I suppose, are reminding us in the West that religion really is all encompassing on a basic level. Most of the world has and continues to live this way, is my understanding, and we took that for granted from distance. Like, we convinced ourselves that we weren't living that way for about a couple centuries, I suppose. That was the project. And then we convinced ourselves that others weren't actually living that way. And now we're realizing that not only are other people not living that way, but perhaps we never lived that way. We actually are a religious species. And this secular move that we took, that we told ourselves we were taking in the 19th and 20th century, was really still a religious move that was in a way doomed to find the end that it's finding. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, it can get. I mean, it gets more complex because, like Judaism never lost sight of that. Halachic Judaism.
Sure.
When I said, you know, there are religions that legislate your economics, Judaism is one of them. Like, I know this may surprise some people only used to, like, stereotypes, but Judaism has a very strict code of how you are supposed to handle money, governing both its, like the ethics of money connect to every aspect of its use, from how I acquire it to, like, how I invest it to what I spend it on, who I give it to, and Judaism, like, its financial codes, or actually, that's the longest portion in the Talmud has to do with the handling of money. Not because that's the most religiously important topic to Jews, it's just the most difficult to discuss. Versus, it's a little easier to discuss issues of, or a little easier to give the laws, about piety. Not that piety is an easier matter at the end of the day, but more straightforward, certainly. And there were philosophers to try and point out that ideas that we took for granted as being irreligious in the West were either derived from or covers for fundamentally religious notions.
Yeah.
You had Hegel and Schelling from the German idealists arguing this. And Schelling's undergoing a big renaissance right now because he tried to wrangle with this exact problem in the 1840s, and nobody wanted to listen to him, and now we're getting kneecapped by it. But even like the Marxist theoretician Walter Benjamin pointed out in the 30s that much of Marxist thought is just a not so hidden cover for a religious eschatology.
Yeah. Yeah. So does that mean
Zionism of history?
Does that mean that we have a harder time talking about other people's religions, I guess, because we're not aware of our own religion in a way, I guess. We think we're the religion that doesn't have a religion in the
our own religions.
Yeah.
Our own metaphysics. A lot of Westerners. I mean, obviously, if you're going to ask somebody at a random Starbucks, like, what are your metaphysics, they're going to just look at you totally blankly. But a lot of Western intellectuals who should know better than Westerners in positions of power who, unfortunately, almost never know better, but again, like, don't need a philosophy degree, but should know where you stand on these issues. Have all these ideas in their head about rationality, freedom, equality. I think I have a meme I've sent, if you want to post it now. Or, justice, that they think are self-given notions. Martha Nussbaum was raked through the coals for this back in the 70s when she uncritically published a paper stating that freedom and justice were the acknowledged values of all humanity. And no less than a dozen individuals wrote in reply that freedom and justice are not the acknowledged values of all humanity, have never been.
Yeah.
And even in cases where they are, it's often not the same freedom and justice, but can potentially very different notions going under similar terms. And fortunately, like, ethical philosophers, metaphysicians, and political philosophers don't always read each other. So you had John Rawls. You talk about earlier. You talk about like the ecumenical branch of the Democrats. Now it's sort of moving away from secularism that was more popular in the 20th century, or the new ecumenical branch of the Republicans that's sort of coming from the Democrats, but it's a little more religious than the secularism that the Democrats was.
Yep.
A lot of that stuff came from a guy. Do you know much about John Rawls?
I do not.
Okay. Does the name at least ring bells?
I'm trying to think. There's a Rollins who is a British philosopher and YouTube streamer guy, and I'm probably thinking of him when I hear that name. So
John Rawls has been dead at least 20 years.
Yeah, so I'm not familiar.
Yeah. John Rawls was probably, if you had to rank in figures who had an influence on America, I'd put him top 3, top 4.
Neat.
Underneath John Locke and Milton Friedman, I think would be the undisputed top 2.
Wow, yeah.
One laid your Constitution, the other laid libertarianism in its modern form. Rawls was the quintessential liberal establishment thinker, and he set himself in his theory of justice the task of establishing how an ordered society would permit for. I mean, he wasn't interested so much in plurality, but admit for freedom and equality. Emphasis on the equality because he was not quite progressive, but a pretty hardline egalitarian. But he didn't want... Okay. Rawls was under the impression that there was only one form of reason, that those who didn't accord with this reason, system of reasoning, were not engaged in reason, and that therefore, if they wanted their views to matter in the public sphere, they had to dispense with their forms of reason and use Rawls. And he justifies this. Much of a theory of justice is very infamous for smuggling in Rawls's private views on how the way things work, under the pretense that this is the only rational society people would ever want to live in, through just a literary fiction called The Veil of Ignorance, where it's like, imagine you had no personality and values. What society would you want to construct? And, oh, golly gee, the society you'd want to construct is the society that just so happens to fit John Rawls' ideal vision of society, because that's the society in which John Rawls' values can flourish the most.
Yeah. Yep.
And this, you talk about
typical philosopher.
Very
doggerel.
I don't want to... I don't want to insult the guy too much by making him sad. Like, this is very normal for how philosophers think, is a very strong tendency to do these sorts of behavior. You saw this with the French Marxists, saw this with most of the other major liberal thinkers. The diversity of ways... Oh, you saw it with Kant, very infamously. That was why he concluded early in his career that the Chinese were incapable of thought. Because they... And he argued with the nationalists of his time, funnily enough, who told him, no, Kant, no! You're just approaching it with your presuppositions on how thinking should work. But yeah, like, and Rawls, very influential. At least two of your presidents, like Clinton and Obama, were either out-and-out Rawlsians or so heavily influenced by him as to have basically been Rawlsians. Rawls even got the Medal of Freedom. Remember which president gave him that. That's why, it's one of those figures who, like, maybe a lot of Americans haven't heard of, but it would be difficult to overstate his influence on how the Democrat Party handles, a lot of issues of equality, a lot of issues of freedom, a lot of issues of justice. They see them, historically, have seen them through a Rawlsian lens. And that lens has been very heavily deconstructed by progressives. I actually agree with progressives for most of their critiques of Rawls. Some of them, of course, are the usual, like, which is really weird out there, actually this is a cover for racism. But some of them, Rawls is not giving you a system that can work with plurality. And what you're seeing now is the brutal fight in the Democrats between the more traditional, like, egalitarian liberal strain and the new progressive strain, which doesn't actually have its own, like, countervision of the world quite solidified. It is a number of competing and disparate theories that they have to reconcile themselves. That's really where you're seeing this implosion about, like, how do we handle, say, Islam and a lot of the, to be blunt, fabrications that people are inventing to make it easier to try and shuttle in elements that would otherwise be entirely incompatible.
Incompatible with what, the modern Western project? Is that the idea? Yeah,
in its liberal or progressive form, right? Like, how do you put it? Egalitarianism has to have the same confrontation too. That the diversity of the world's ideas is not. This isn't some new invention of the British colonizers going around giving people an egalitarian thinking. It's most of the world was not egalitarian, and so if you want to have a meaningful engagement with someone like from another culture, from another religion, and again, oftentimes we say culture, religion, like political philosophy. Often these are the same thing. In certain, like Confucianism is all three simultaneously. It really, there's still ongoing disputes, but it's becoming very obvious to a lot of academics that the Confucianism just blows apart most of our understandings of what it means to be either religious or intellectual or political or cultural in the West. And right now it's undergoing a huge revival in China.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, big revival. And including amongst diasporic communities. So I know sometimes we treat Confucianism like a dead philosophy, but it's still very much vital.
Confucian nationalism
and it does
on the rise.
Have intellect. Well, there's Confucian liberalism, there's Confucian nationalism, there's actually anarchist Confucian philosophies. It's a very like some of the, almost totally peripheral, but actually they're having the same disputes in China, where you have thinkers like Joseph Chan who want to unify this explicitly the Rawlsian project, like he quotes Rawls verbatim, with Confucianism to produce a Confucian-inflected liberalism, and then you have other thinkers like Tong Dongbai or Jiang Qing, or those are both Confucians, but you're having the same criticism from socialist thinkers, that Chan is trying to compatibilize two philosophies that don't just have differing social orders or questions on like how should we live. They have those problems because they differ on how should we think.
Yeah.
Like, what does it mean to think in the world and to be in the world? And the Rawlsian thought process is one way. We sometimes call this theory-laden thought in Western universities. I've seen continental thinkers from Germany call it the concatenation of ideas. The underlying ideas, just basically that thinking and thinking about things and values are not separable. In any sense. And so you have the question of like, well, if China's not going to adopt this Rawlsian liberal system, what is China going to go with that's best for the values of the Chinese people? Like what will lead to a just society? And then you have attempts to sort of reconcile. Like a Confucianism typically is not, we don't think of it as a democratic philosophy, but there are figures on the Chinese mainland in Taiwan too. And we just got this stream canceled. Sorry. My apologies. There are thinkers in different countries in the Sinosphere that are trying to create Confucian forms of democracy, and they are confronting the issue that, like, American democracy has certain very explicit postulates that are implicitly engaged in metaphysical and religious projects. And what do those look like if we try to import them into China?
Yeah. No, that's, if I could just say, I think a great many rising and established world powers are thinking about how to be modern without being Western. it's fascinating. That's frightening and fascinating to watch. If I could, I'm trying to think if I could bring it up fast. I don't know. This is just anecdotal. Have you ever noticed? I'm bringing up Iranian diplomats. I don't know if you've ever noticed this. Iranian diplomats never wear a tie. They always wear a suit. They never wear a tie. And I was reading, who's the guy? He was the Turkish historian. Historian. What's the book? Bernard Lewis. Were you ever interested in him at all? He talked about what led to. I should turn the memes off. What was the? He wrote a book called "What Went Wrong."
Bernard Lewis.
Yeah. He mentioned what he tried to solve the problem from a.
You're cutting out for me.
Uh-oh. Am I? We'll see if I'm still here on the live stream side. But he tried to solve the issue of why the Islamic world lost the race to modernity, and lost it. I mean, lost it to the West. The race to be the first to be, to be modern superpowers, and he wrote a fascinating book on it. And he actually no one actually knows why Iranian politicians don't wear ties. It's not actually it's not a law. It's not something that they explicitly discuss. But he actually posited that it may. This is the idea of making a statement on the world stage that we're modern and we're not Western, and the tie has a cruciform appearance, and so maybe we're not going to wear a tie because that makes us a little too look like the the Kafirs, but we will wear the suit to let you know that we are modern people on the modern stage. Anyway, I think that's an interesting anecdote. Don't know if it's true or not, if Bernard Lewis was onto something, but many people, India included, obviously China already, asserting their vision of what modernity can look like for their people, and increasingly it doesn't look very Western. maybe in some respects it's because they are pointing out, like you have, that there are implicit religious convictions behind the Western project that were left largely unevaluated in the West until it was up it was up to non-Westerners to critique that and dismantle it, and again try to do this modern thing without being Western, to demonstrate that one can do one without the other. What do you think?
I mean, a lot of Westerners did actually critique these ideas in the 19th and 20th century. They were just ignored.
There you go.
And even now, you're still seeing Western, like you had Hegel, as I mentioned Hegel, I mentioned Schelling. I could mention no less than a dozen Jewish philosophers who heavily, like Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, for instance, extensively critiqued the assumptions of Western liberalism, the epistemic assumptions, as much as the assumptions about phenomenological assumptions. And these arguments were then picked up in the 20th century amongst Jews by thinkers like Rosenzweig. Some of them led to some other spheres. There were attempts to get around this by trying to construct meta-ethics without metaphysics. These did not succeed. the ontological project. I mean, it's just pretty implicit that you're engaged in ontology anytime you talk about, or issues of ontology and metaphysics whenever you talk about values. But they were revived again and again in like the 60s and the 70s by thinkers like Alasdair MacIntyre and Charles Taylor. And most Western philosophers have been content to ignore their conclusions. And it's only in the last decade or so that they've really started to be picked up, thanks to Islam.
Wow.
In a way. Yeah, it's really because, like, it's entirely acceptable, for instance, even today, to just assume that the Hindu religion will be annihilated in favor of a secular Indian state. The Western, like, the Indian government is trying to move, and including a lot of opposition parties are trying to move against this sort of Western vision. But there are substantial forces within India that are trying to carry on the Western secular project, aided by Western university academies. And so you have similar issues going on in Burma or Myanmar and Thailand over the status of Buddha. Like, Buddhism, again, never is, like, it never had a notion. I mean, they don't even think of themselves as a religion. In the Western sense of the word. And up until quite recently, they uncritically had the Buddhist law codes in Burma and to a lesser extent, but still to some extent in Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam. And now they're almost going the opposite way, where they're trying to figure out, is there a way to install a free, secular polity while respecting our Buddhist heritage? But you still have, like, Western Buddhologists writing out of Burma are, like, just sort of assuming that the secular West will win. And in a way, as weird as it is, I'm sort of happy that Islam ended up becoming this protected class. Because it means that academics are now finally having to wrangle with these somewhat obvious metaphysical political problems for the first time in history. And like, you know, if I wanted to be a true egalitarian, like, how am I going to deal with, and a post-colonial egalitarian or anti-colonial, how am I going to deal with the fact that egalitarianism is sort of directly engaged in a struggle against the philosophies held by the average quote-unquote minority individual. So, yeah, it's like, and this is why when you see if you ever read philosophy works on this topic from China and India, you'll notice they tend to be quite irate because they keep reiterating the same problem. And Westerners are just like, no, bro, just get rid of your religious values. It's a private matter.
Yeah. And
that's the dread. Sorry.
No. Yeah, continue. Sorry.
I didn't have anything more interesting to say.
I had filibustering for a second because I did find it was a meme I saw recently. You will appreciate. There it is. It says, learning about how Buddhism isn't a religion but a philosophy of life by going to all the temples with Buddha's teeth. So just a joke on the how we have these low resolution paradigms that we don't, like, we built this concept in the modern world in the West called religion, and it's a bucket for into which we put certain kinds of content and not other kinds of content, and that's a relatively recent systemization of human expression, right? Most of the world has not engaged in that activity. Certainly not a universal thing. So, and it looks like it never will be. So, how we engage with Buddhism in particular, I think, gets interesting because it's almost, I think, in the secular West there was a sense that we should be emphatic about not calling a religion, and that was because we had so much respect for it, and we were trying to indicate that it was a superior way by not giving it the stink of religious, the sort of things that the West was trying to minimize and help progress humanity beyond, I guess, through the religious instinct. So there was, I think there was a Western project to de-religify, but it goes back to those kind of category errors, I think, of trying to define religion in a certain narrow sense that isn't universal.
Yeah, so. I mean, it came, in Buddhism's case, it came from like 4 or 5 different quarters. You have the Sam Harrises who they wanna practice, they want a binding, right? Like religio is binding for Latin. Its literal meaning in the Roman context in which the word first arose was to connote the series of rites and actions that bind man to the divine order. Which is why I actually don't think it's an issue if a religion is theistic or not. Because, if Marxism aims to bind people to just the way the world is, it doesn't matter if Marxism's theistic or not.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think a lot of times you did hear it wasn't a religion because they didn't have I would argue that they very much have a pantheon, but they don't have a pantheon in the sense that we normally expect. So that makes them, if they're agnostic in the way that we define it, that makes them not a religion, which is fascinating that we would do that to them.
Yeah, so you had people like Sam Harris who wanted a religion without a spirituality, basically.
Yep.
And they felt Buddhism would fit that. And then you had the New Agers for whom religion signified rules. And like the New Age is very like, I don't want to keep saying Protestant because I think Protestant is in some sense a very meaningless phrase.
Yeah.
But it's very like American. It's a very American Christian or very like Pentecostal in its antinomianism, or anti-sacramentalism. They go on and on about sacredness in New Age circle. Sacred sex, sacred dances, sacred earth. But for them, it often signifies a lack of rules, a lack of inviolability, in complete opposite to what the sacred meant. And they wanted a spirituality without a religion. So again, Buddhism suddenly gets stripped of the deity yoga and magic wall mats and wizard spells and astrology and alchemical immortal summoning that has marked Buddhism in its Chinese, Tibetan, Japanese, Korean, Thai, Cambodian, Burmese, and Sinhalese forms, and it becomes this good, like this feel-good, have-no-desire religion of like the Alan Watts of the world. And Buddhists themselves, when they came here, they saw the opprobrium heaped on Christianity for being a religion. And they saw that they couldn't operate in a public sphere if they went by a religion, so they went, well, of course Buddhism isn't a religion. It's a philosophy.
That's very fair. That's a very sensible survival tactic.
Oh, yeah. I'm not saying this critically. It involved certain mutations to what it means to be Buddhist that I think harmed them as much as our understanding of them in the long run, but 100%, I understand why they did it. The same reason a lot of Jews who were angled with modernity have tried to drift away from ritual.
Yep.
Because modernity does not think of ritual as a way of knowing. It's just not habitually a feature of learning about the world in the Western mindset. And so we, in the 19th century, you get, Reform Judaism. They get the name because the goal was to reform Judaism to make it more German. Why, very ironic that they're the sect that's now most concerned with, whiteness. But, and then you add conservative Judaism, which was we're not going to adhere to these outdated rituals, but we'll take the middle road in how we get rid of them. Between, just throwing everything out the window, which is what the Reform had done by 1840, and, or, stringent adherence to the law, ritual. So halacha, for those who don't know, just means the way. So we translated Jewish law. That's a mistranslation. The Jews are not typically concerned with the law as Westerners understand it. Yeah.
I saw the just another little interesting moment. Harmeet Dillon praised the Chardi Kala spirit of Donald Trump. So I looked up what she meant by that. Apparently, according to Siki Wiki, it's it loosely means a positive, buoyant, and optimistic attitude to life and to the future. It's a frame of mind in Sikhism that a practicing Sikh has to accept and strive to embody. Always cheerful, ever progressive. It's interesting. So that Chardi Kala attitude converts to work, worship, and charity. That's how you live that out. So that's interesting. Yeah, these categories. I mean, simply put, I mean, I know you saw it on social media. It's probably in the news too. But we simply don't have. I mean, we've just never had Sikh. We've never had South Asian immigration to America for some reason. They all went to Canada. I'm never sure why, but that has led to wildly. I remember there was a shooting at some point a few years into the second Iraq War of a Sikh individual because the killer thought he was Muslim, and that's about as high resolution as most Americans get, and that's not a right or left thing. people would see this woman wrapping her head before praying, which most people of the world, most Abrahamic faith people of the world if they're a woman, they're wrapping their head before praying. But they would see that and just think, I guess she's Muslim? I don't know what's going on right now. So it's fascinating to see this particular moment at the RNC of all people. Apparently she's a really a free speech advocate, kind of. That's the sort of people that she represents. So she works hard for that. So on paper, her CV is the sort of thing that would work well at the RNC, but her religious life is something that people just don't know. They just don't have categories for in America, honestly. And it's not conservatives who are ignorant. It's Americans. So,
Oh yeah.
you know,
Um, like part of the issue here is America has not, because it hasn't really allowed religion into the public sphere.
yeah,
It has very, very low religious literacy, which means the it's not just that people don't, like, if you don't know, there's what, 8,000 religions out there. There's nobody on the planet who's going to know all of them. Um, but if you have the right lexicon and the ways of approaching these issues, it often doesn't matter if you've heard of the religion before or not. You can, like, if you have, you need the right mindset, a certain, like, toolbox of concepts and sort of some ways of approaching language, and you can usually get by with most religious people. But America, like, there is no religious education to speak unless you go to, like, your Catholic day school,
yeah,
or whatever. And that's probably not going to lean in on the metaphysics or issues of epistemology. Question, like, what is belief? What is community? There's a
faith.
major. I just learned last week there's a major synod going on in the Catholic Church right now that has the potential to singularly change the way the entire Christian world operates. And it hasn't been covered at all. But the Catholic Church may reevaluate its entire way of thinking about space. And how does the church function in space?
Could you define space? Are you talking about like
the
stars and planets? Oh, neat.
No. Like, if you think of the external, if space is a technical term in philosophy, connotes, like, the arrangement and values of the external world. So, to give an example here is, if you think of, like, how do people approach the space of, say, a concrete hellscape like Toronto or New York versus how might they approach the space of a functioning small urban environment with integration into nature. That's one example. Another more example in terms of values is, let's say there's a 5-year-old kid and he's playing at lunch, right? No teacher makes a comment. He goes inside after lunch and keeps playing. Teacher punishes him, right? Why?
Yeah.
It's not because play is bad. It's because play is not. The school is not the space for play. Like, class time is class time. It's time for study. Or if there is play, it'll be studying play, not like dribbling a ball around. Recess is the space time for play.
Yeah.
This is actually another amazing example of the really weird ways that different religions impact is Western discourse about. Can you say the sex word on YouTube? Are we in trouble?
No, I think we're fine. Yeah.
You can use the Neoplatonic generative act.
Absolutely.
No. Western discourse about the generative act. I love that.
It's great.
Like, you see all these Neoplatonists arguing about generation, and you're like, what's...
Yeah. Yeah. That root word has a particular normative meaning, or once did. Yeah.
Yes. The generative act disputes about, like, if I said it's not right to talk about generative acts in public or, say, on Twitter, the dispute in the West tends to revolve around the morality of generative acts. So you'll have people accusing you of being a prude, and then people who don't want generative acts on Twitter are like, I'm not a prude, it's minors use this platform, is what they go to. When really the objection is not that they don't want to see the generative act because they think it's bad, it's they don't want to see the generative act because the generative act belongs in a very specific place for most people.
Sure.
Right. Not even traditional religious people. Like, just most people want to be in the very, very specific mood, very, like, with the right person. Maybe not, like, the person they want to marry, but, before they start getting all erotic. They don't want to do it anywhere all the time. Much in the same way that we don't, like say you talk about personal finance. Most of us are fine talking about personal finance, but if I spoke about it constantly, you'd want to dribble me like a basketball. Same with climate change. And so one of the like how many, we all know that one guy who won't shut up about climate change and everyone hates him.
Yeah.
Not because everyone doesn't think climate change is important, but because it's super depressing hearing about how many, like, near extinct species of otter there are 24/7 when you can't do anything about any of this stuff. Anywho, sorry, to stop giving examples and get back to the point here. A lot of religions have very specific ways of approaching space.
Yes.
They not like
particularly
that,
Catholics,
in terms of how people move through space. Well, yeah, Catholics, Jews. Like, this isn't even a West versus non-West. This is like, because you have Catholics and Jews that, like, different ways. Muslims, like the Chinese are famous for their exceedingly complex theories of man in space. They have written far more on this topic. In fact, like, you could almost think of China as like Chinese religions as the spatial religions. The amount
feng shui and all that.
Spent on like feng shui, and feng shui maps onto the human body. It's something a lot of Westerners don't notice or realize. The whole thing is it's a body external world, like Hermeticism.
Sure.
As above, so below. Microcosm, macrocosm. So they very extensive readings on man in space and built environment. And these tend to be very important, not just like for old Chinese and for a lot of other East Asian in the West.
Yeah, you're right. I'm not finding a lot of news articles about this. This convention, the synod.
On what, space in Canada?
No, the.
Synod on synodality. Yeah. There's almost nothing, and yet. The Pope Francis is introducing an idea into Catholicism that has the potential to completely redefine, like, Christian ecumenicalism and how Christians spatially relate to each other on an international stage. And the media cannot understand. So I'm not saying this like super critically. It's not like the average reporter knows anything more about religion than the average American, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So they see this discussion on synodality and they're like, oh, this is just some stuff on, like, church organization. Not realizing the almost colossal impact such a piece of legislation could have.
This is fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, really. I didn't even... And the only reason I know is because the Babylon Bee ran an article on... some guy just got excommunicated for trying to set up his own diocese. And the Babylon Bee ran an article on the man, and I looked him up because I wanted to see what they were talking about. Like, man, Francis excommunicates man for being Christian was the title. He was excommunicated for denying Vatican II and then trying to set up his own diocese. The other stuff was just icing on the cake.
It's funny, we always get blamed for protesting the establishment and not leaving but just merely protesting, and then we get kicked out, and then they say that we left. Typically, how this thing goes. I did find the synods.
He did leave.
Oh, okay. Well,
he left first, voluntarily, and then they excommunicated.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, but this is just the very typical Sedevacantist fight, mm-hmm. right?
Sure.
Man sinks more and more into traditional Catholicism, which is nothing against it, but then he segues into and now I'm going to get rid of Vatican II. And then he discovers he can't do that and remain in the Catholic Church, so he sets up a new diocese and he gets excommunicated.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of these globally.
Just wait till they get Vatican III with the Synod on Synodality. Interesting.
Yeah, we'll have to see how big this document ends up being, because depending on the changes they make, it could very well be Vatican III.
I wonder how this relates to. I did see J.D. Vance, the VP pick for Trump, is. I knew it. I mean, we all know his wife is of Indian descent, but she is also identifies as Hindu, and their kids are Christian, which is interesting. He became a Christian in 2019, so he became a Christian after their marriage, but. That's interesting in itself.
That must be hard.
I can only imagine. Yeah, but from a post-Vatican II perspective, I think there's probably ways to navigate that there weren't before. If I had to take a guess.
Yeah, it's going to. How do I put this? Part of the issue in the West is going to be jettisoning a lot of the words like monotheism versus, say, polytheism.
Yeah.
And the nexus of categories, like dualism, non-dualism.
Yep.
I keep seeing words like this. I don't think most religions are non-dual. It's how they conceive of non-dualism that differs from religion to religion.
Yeah. Yeah. And you need a higher resolution framework to navigate that. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll see people be like, well, unlike Christianity with its God-man divide, Hinduism's non-dual. And I'm like, that's not what that means.
Yeah. We're the religion that talks about God and man becoming one. The God-man. So, I don't know how... I mean, maybe... I guess they're trying to say creation-creator divide. There's not as much... but that doesn't hold true very well. I mean, there's lots... everybody I know that's converted to Eastern Orthodoxy talks about panentheism. So it's not as clear. And Judaism very much does too, right? Orthodox streams of Judaism. So people aren't tracking very well when they use that kind of terminology.
A lot of Eastern writers know just as little about the West as the West knows about the East.
Yeah.
Islam's an obvious example of the almost stunning, the absolutely flabbergasting ignorance of Christianity in Islamic writings continually blows me away. I will never forget the tenured academic teaching at, I think it was Yale. One of these really prestigious, universities, she puts out a book on jinn, and she says that she has no idea where certain Islamic writers got the notion that the devil tempted Eve in the form of a serpent, and concludes it must have come from Jewish folklore. And then I have met multiple Muslims who thinks it's a salient critique of Christianity to say that no Christian would say that God could have become a baby.
Yeah. Yeah.
But even when you get to like Hinduism, they tend to really, and I can't. They're working more from the news than from like and sit down, spend months studying Christian theology. They tend to equate Christianity with like Baptist fundamentalism.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I've read a few Hindu scholars propose that the Vedas must not be scriptures. Hinduism teaches that there's an interpretive method for the Vedas, and if it were a scripture, there'd be no interpretation. You would just read it literalistically. It's real win for Protestants here, having proven that the Catholics don't even believe in the Bible.
Yeah.
They got no scriptures.
Yeah, well said. Yeah. I hope...
And I think...
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, sorry. I'm giving you room.
Hopefully we'll start getting rid... I mean, yeah, it probably won't happen, because right now we're trending more and more towards bizarre and arcane forms of religious or anti-theistic fanaticism. But in an ideal world, we would begin laying aside some of these conceptual frameworks we've tried to use to analyze some strange religions like Hindu, or from a Western eye, strange religions like Hinduism.
Yeah, strange is in the old sense of it. Yeah,
like phenomenological and metaphysical frameworks that center on accurate understandings of what they're trying to believe about themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I do see streams of that taking place at the level of Discord and live streams sporadically. I've seen people. There's a group who's probably watching the replay of this right now, who does this sort of thing. You and I come from a Discord group that does this sort of thing. It's not normative, but it is not something that I think existed even to this extent 4 or 5 years ago. I think there's something interesting about the medium of Discord and YouTube. I think, frankly, there's something about that long form, explorative platform approach that it encourages a lot of things, but one of the things it does encourage is for people like you and I, who are, I would say, high in openness and maybe autistically interested in details and anthropological distinctions, but it gives us plenty of room to explore that, I think, and think through ramifications and implications. To the extent that has any impact on our culture remains to be seen. But we do have a millennial as a vice president pick for the United States, as leader of the free world, as they say. So it's not, all hope is not lost, and one day we will have the levers of power, Yondar. It won't be boomers all the way to the end of our days. At some point, the levee starts to crack, and the people who are once outsiders discover that they might be able to push culture in interesting ways, and inshallah, that there's a few of us helping to push it in interesting ways that you and I agree culture would benefit from. And not just our culture.
Hopefully.
But, yeah.
Well, yeah. Like, questions like this, we treat them... the everything is political. People are real creeps, but they do have a point that there is, like, no separate spheres. Everything is interrelated.
Yeah.
And so when we ask a lot of these questions, aren't questions about religion per se, and this is one of the reasons why I think secularism is so immensely unhelpful. They're questions about how do we rectify, or how do we find, I want to say maybe unity, togetherness, in a world riven by, frankly, insurmountable differences.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because you can impose ethnic or religious uniformity, do the Christian nationalist take over, slaughter all the Jewish infidels, create your glorious white ethno-state, but you still have to wrangle with this issue because then you have to handle with all the differences between regional cultures, between different sects of Christianity. Different personalities.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a kind of I've seen some Christian national arguments from the England, for instance, there was an attempt to argue for a pan-Christian, a Christian ummah, the body of believers globally, and this coming from a Catholic. Which I found interesting. I suppose this is a Catholic who embraces Vatican II. but in order to even argue for a pan-Christian identity that has a national thrust to it, you have to argue against how, frankly, certainly Catholic, but certainly also Protestant national movements have gone on for the last 500 years. you'd have to say, I don't know what you do. I guess that's kind of a Christian globalism, is really what you. In order to get that big and encompassing and multinational, transnational, you really have to argue for that. And I don't think it is just indicative of the paucity of clarity in the sort of people who are discussing this with platforms that these category errors are not occurring to them. They're acting out of instincts with vacuous sound bites rather than confronting problems. I know you're mad about the Sudan. I know you're mad that you a Christian are upset at Palestinian Christians in their status. I know you're upset about a lot of things that are happening to Christians, but I don't think you haven't thought through how to do anything more than be mad about that. Is kind of that's the conclusion I've taken. I hear that you're mad. I don't hear any solutions other than normal realpolitik, secular ecumenical, not secular, but there's some kind of ecumenical normal statecraft negotiations that we've always done. You're not introducing anything new, in this age at least.
Well, yeah, pretty much. And you have to figure out how, you can't. There's not going to be a pan-Christian ummah. I don't know to break this to people. We'll have to figure out how to have multiple religions operate simultaneously. Because really, that's often what you're wrangling with. In practical terms, there's definitely some fairly major Christian denominations that have less to do with each other than Catholics have to do with Jews.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, I think it's a question about difference, which is why it'll be such an issue for egalitarians, because they've really drilled down on the inclusion good, exclusion bad dichotomy.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
But it is something the rest of us have to confront.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, largely, I think this kind of inter-Christian rivalry that is more popular now in internet spheres than in previous years is, it's popular to say that it's LARPing, and it is, but I think it's LARPing in a particular way that people have just stopped knowing how to engage. There's a lot of Christians who are new to Christianity. There's a lot of Christians who don't leave their house much. There's a lot of Christians who have their normative way of expressing with and investing in Christianity is online. And so, that just kind of produces a certain type of mentality that it's not engaging with neighbors very much. so you don't have to. So the question isn't how do I engage with my secular atheist? Even if there's no such thing as secularism, how do I engage with people who believe that they're secular, who identify as secular? That's complete. That's like dissolving at a rapid pace. I think, at least particularly with younger generations. So they're like, well, at least I can argue with other Christians and with Jews, and occasionally with Muslims because they seem to enjoy that. And all those things do not have very much consequence to their real lives compared to what they could be learning, which is how to engage with how a Republican could engage with a Democrat, for instance, on like zoning laws in their county, or some such practical kind of ground level sort of political ecumenical conversation. So instead there's I think that's by design. Honestly, I think sometimes people retreat intentionally and they play kind of parlor games in the bunker. They play chess. Until they can figure out how to actually.
It takes courage.
Right? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And we always talk about intellectual charity. That's great. Nothing against it. I'm a big fan, but we don't talk about like intellectual courage, intellectual honor. Intellectual manliness,
bravery,
willingness to wrangle with these questions, but also to descend and think deeper, reevaluate the question itself. That was the helpful legacy of skepticism, and there's a couple issues are compounding here. One is the baby boomer generation very much emphasized solving differences by pretending they don't exist. That was the hippie way. That way is failing us because it was awful. Like that's I hate Dr. Seuss's like the Butter Battle book. That is the worst book. It should be removed from every school. Do not read your kids that book. That is the worst way to approach a difference. It's like, disputes over ways to live your life are just equal to disputes about how to butter bread. And then you encounter a real problem and you have no way to handle it. But I think the other problem is when we talk about the end of an age, the risk is always that we shoot the baby to death and blow it to smithereens while we're getting rid of that bathwater, and then stomp on the baby's corpse and set it on fire. Like we had this, like when the Enlightenment came along and they were like, we're going to get rid of all this blah, 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 like tradition, ritual, authority or whatever. And they did. Or they thought, a lot of it's kept on secretly because a lot of these things are intrinsic to what it means to be human. But they blew these things to smithereens. And then it wasn't until later that they started realizing that maybe things like tradition and ritual and authority and revelation had not been harebrained, cockamamie schemes of oppressive church elites. Maybe they'd had some function in our normative commitments. And it wasn't just like conservative religious thinkers. It was often Marxists who pointed this out. Like you had Christopher Lasch, you had, as I said, Alistair McIntyre, T.A. Cohen, Martin Heidegger, who very much wasn't a Marxist but was an atheist. And they tried to revive, like Hans Georg Gadamer, who, unlike everyone else on that list, was Christian. McIntyre converted to Catholicism. But that aside, tried to revive some of these issues and bring out their relevance. And you had the Renaissance doing something similar with the medieval period that we still haven't recovered from. And the real risk with our generation is we're basically carpet burning the Enlightenment. But engaging in modernity in an anti-Western fashion. We're going to see, as it is, I think rights have already become arguably, in Canada, they don't even matter. They may as well jettison them out the window. They're just a rhetorical device at this point. Freedom, equality, but also human dignity and skepticism, the tradition of skepticism. As people react against the Enlightenment values, the risk is, maybe there were definitely issues with some of these. I'm not big on equality, not because I think people are unequal. I just think it's a bad way of approaching moral quandaries. But they didn't come into being for no reason. And the problem is, as people react against a derelict, empty, pseudo-skepticism, the risk is they drift into bizarre forms of absolutism with no room for skepticism or respect for human dignity and freedom. Really seeing this in some of the philosophies taking shape right now.
Gosh, that's a really poignant observation and a great way to land the plane for this stream, this debut stream with Yondar. Thanks so much for having this conversation with me, and I know we're gonna figure out the restreaming capabilities so that we could have the conversation on multiple platforms at once, and eventually you guys are going to see recorded stuff that we put together. I'm almost done with it's Nietzsche, and Nietzsche is being a bicha to me, and I'm just editing audio issues with it, but it's almost done. But in the meantime, we could do live streaming. And we're going to have more conversations like this in the future. So if you've enjoyed this sort of thing, such as it is, these are the sort of conversations we've been having for years. We just haven't been recording them. So we just thought maybe it's worth recording a few, every once in a while. Why not? And see what you guys think. So, please stick around and subscribe if you are interested in this sort of thing, because there's certainly more to come. We've got plans. We've got philosopher guests that we are gunning for bringing on. We're going to have that sort of thing happen. It's going to be a lot of fun. So, Yondar, anything you want to speak to? Anything you want to plug? Do you want to? I can get your what's your channel's link? I can get that pinned.
Wild Philosopher. I can pull it up.
Yes, please.
Here, I'll DM you the link. Here. Yeah, Wild Philosopher.
Mm-hmm.
I write fiction that's not super relevant. I am working on a bunch of essays, including some for the videos we've recorded.
Mm-hmm.
So as I publish those, I might start plugging them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'd love to
But yeah, just
share them.
A channel for now.
There we go. Pinned in the chat, and it's going to be in the show notes as well. Yeah, so thanks again, everyone, for hanging out and enduring our dulcet tones as we explore this concept. This really is something that we're kicking around and trying to get at from multiple angles and dimensions. Is the modernity and its ailments, and what can we say about that? What can we reform? What can we save? What were we misidentifying and misappropriating the whole time with the modern project? What were our blind spots? Which is why we're in the place that we are today, I guess. So, thanks again for checking this out, and we'll talk to you guys later.